Okay, thank you. Good morning, and thank you all very much for joining us today. I'm Steve McMenamin. I'd like to welcome you to today's event, which is part of the continuing series of the Greenwich Roundtable. Our topic this morning, The Doctor is In, Has Biotech Investing Arrived, is a continuation of our session from July in 2004, when Rob Langer gave us a glimpse of the road ahead. This is also a continuation of our session from April of 2000, when Craig Venter told us how mapping the genome would unlock a lot of discovery. Today we'll hear from three seasoned practitioners. I'll briefly introduce them after I say this. Anything that they say doesn't, mean that we agree with them.
Good.
With that, sitting to Peter's left is Biwa Chen. She's the CEO of Cormorant Asset Management, a $500 million biotech hedge fund based in Boston. Before founding Cormorant, Ms. Chen managed a separately managed account inside a large multi-strategy hedge fund, whose name shall go unmentioned. Before that, Ms. Chen was a healthcare analyst at American Express Asset Management and an equity analyst for Putnam Investments, both in Boston. Biwa has an advanced degree in molecular biology from Cornell Medical College, as well as a degree in genetics and genetic engineering from Fudan University in Shanghai, China. Sitting next to Biwa, Amir Nashat is a managing partner at Polaris Partners, a top-tier venture capital firm in Boston. Amir focuses on healthcare, consumer products, and energy. He serves on the Partners Innovation Fund and is a catalyst of the Deshpande Center for Technological Innovation at MIT. Amir currently represents Polaris as a director of several biotech companies, include AgBiome, A-Tier Pharmaceuticals, Bind Therapies, Fate Therapeutics, and Receptos. Before Polaris, Amir completed his PhD as a Hertz Fellow in Chemical Engineering at MIT under the guidance of Dr. Rob Langer. And Tim Shannon is sitting next to Amir. He's a partner at Canaan Partners, a venture capital firm based in Westport, Connecticut. And Tim's an entrepreneur, a researcher, a professor, and a practicing physician in pulmonary and critical care medicine. Tim's operating experience is used to help companies grow from university technologies to funded companies. Most recently, Tim was startup CEO of Arvinas, a biopharmaceutical company focused on oncology. Before Canaan, Tim was Chief Executive Officer of Curagen and the Senior Vice President of Global Medical Development in Bayer's Pharmaceutical Business Group. Before that, Dr. Shannon was Assistant Professor of the Pulmonary and Critical Care Division at Yale and an attending physician at West Haven VA Medical Center. And the moderator of the Greenwich Roundtable today is Peter Lawrence. You all know Peter, and he's put together a fine panel today, so I'll kick it off to Peter.
Thank you very, very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming today, for weathering a little bit of chill, but come on now, we live in New England, and my take is you've made a little bit of an effort to be here, and you're going to be rewarded for it today. This is exciting. Biotech has had quite a run in the last year, and I think it caught a lot of us all by surprise. So the question that we're going to be addressing today is why did it happen? Is it deserved? Or are we setting ourselves up for another round of disappointment in the biotech space? We're lucky to have this group of panelists. I would say we have a public market representative, we have a venture capital private markets representative, and we have an operator, a fellow who spent much of his career building companies of this sort. So a really nice mix of perspectives, I think, and I also think you're going to see and hear some disagreement. And we're going to have a little bit of not cynicism, but maybe skepticism, and we're going to get a lot of optimism. So I think we'll be looking forward to your questions and your engagement here, but you're in for, I think, a bit of a treat. So, it has been quite a run. You saw last year, NASDAQ was up, call it 35-40%, but the biotech index for NASDAQ was up 65%, I think was the number. So a really significant move in that end. If you looked at the IPO marketplace for venture-backed IPOs, the percentage of healthcare-oriented IPOs relative to all venture-backed IPOs was extremely high. So suddenly there was this significant participation on the healthcare side. But as we look at some indicators of how investors feel, we can look, for instance, at the venture capital space and where investors are putting their money to work. And it was pretty intriguing to us that last year, the percentage of total capital raised in the venture space for healthcare relative to, let's say, information technology, fell from what has historically been around 25% of total capital raised to 11%. It's very difficult for a healthcare fund to raise capital in this marketplace. And I think that's indicative of where investors have been feeling about the biotech space in general, healthcare in general. Is unpredictable. How do you value it? How do you value these things? What are the commercial elements? And frankly, there are all sorts of hurdles that a biotech company faces. There's very capital intensive up front, and there are all sorts of roadblocks at the end of the path, right? It's FDA approvals, it's reimbursement issues, it's will the medical community take up your drug or your device. So the risks are significant in this market. So it's easy to be a cynic, but the fact is the markets are beginning to tell us something else. And so the question is it sustainable? I just was reading a blog from a fellow named Bruce Booth. He is another VC from a Boston firm who just got back from the JP Morgan conference. And if you're in this business, everyone attended the JP Morgan conference last week. He came out saying, feeling lots and lots of optimism. He said, he likened what's happening in this marketplace today to what occurred in the information technology space over the last decade. That is, a lot of disappointment around the internet in the tech bubble, and now real businesses today with businesses that have really huge revenue growth, big revenues and big market caps. He said the same thing's happening in drugs. There are real drugs. There are actual profits. Where there was hope and hype in the past, he expects to see more actual data and patient value supporting some of the enthusiasm we've seen over the last year for biotech. So that's setting the table. I think Biwa is going to pop up that bubble very quickly, and I leave it to you, Biwa, to start us off.
So as you can tell from my bio, I was a die-hard scientist. So I came to U.S. and then I changed my mind. And after business school, I got my first job at Putnam Investment. I got a letter from my father, and he said, people in my hometown, including me, are very disappointed at your new career choice. We've seen you grow up to be very diligent, very level-headed, and now you've chosen to go into gambling. So I've spent my last 15 years trying to prove to him it's not gambling. And I'm going to spend 5 minutes convincing you guys. The reason I think it's not gambling is it's actually one of the things that there's real concrete evidence for you to analyze. And then there's scientific rationale and there's strong logic behind it. So the way I approach this, I believe market is semi-efficient when it comes to the available information, but what's really inefficient is when you project out. So biotech has these milestones. Basically, you start with a scientific concept, you get lab data, progressively from molecular assay to cellular assay to animal model, and then you go into human phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and then you kind of get a sense about efficacy, predicted side effect, unpredicted side effect, and then you go in front of FDA if you ever make it through these milestones. So what really makes money is to take into account all the available information up to that point and trying to predict what happened next. And so that's actually very science and logic driven. The part about valuation, it does go up and down with the market and the sentiment, but over the years I found it's really helpful just to think about how the peak sales of each drug will be. Market has a way to value it, and merger and acquisition also has a way to evaluate the value of these things too. So if you think about large company or pharma company, whatever they're trading at, you think about what a new product will be worth to them. The gross margin are very predictable. Most things are over 90% gross margin. The R&D cost by the time of approval is done. Some have label expansion R&D. You can model that. And then the sales and the marketing is where in different companies, the incremental cost is completely different. So if you stand alone company, you have to carry, say, $100, $200 million of SG&A. But if you fold it into, say, a cancer drug, you fold it into Genentech, the incremental cost could be only $50 million. So that's why at the end of the day, it doesn't pay to really model the EPS of each individual little companies. To me, the most efficient way is to model the price to peak sales, then discount it back by your probability or time value of money. You have your own set of rules and apply it across different companies in the same sector. And another way I found useful is, it's my choosing anyway. I like to long and short, so you can kind of hedge out all the craziness of up and down evaluation and really capture the alpha. So I totally believe there's good alpha in biotech. Now, currently, is it a big bubble or the investment has arrived? So my conclusion is has always been investable for the last 20 years. I don't think it's more investable going forward than before because the odds of success is still low. So let's say it used to be 15%. Now it's 20, 25%. At the individual company basis, you still face the binary event where you have to make the call. 15 to 20 is not that big a difference. But the valuation has already reflected that. So I'm not sure just because there's more robust pipeline, it make the investment in biotech easier. Maybe there are more companies for you to look at. So is this a complete bubble? I don't believe so. Like Peter was saying, there is real product that's real profit. But I want to point out like my view of what got us here. So the largest biotech drugs, the first wave in the 80s and 90s, were simple protein replacement. Basically, we know a few extremely important hormones in our body, and we figured out how to make it by fermentation. Those are low-hanging fruit, biology-wise, because there's nothing poorly understood about it. And then the next wave is really in the cancer and autoimmune disease. And that was because all the molecular biology advanced in the last, say, 20, 30 decades. But we couldn't target these molecules for a long time until monoclonal antibody technology mature. Once that mature, we have already well-validated molecules, and the monoclonal antibody are very predictable in terms of drug. Their binding to their target is exquisitely specific. So we have tens of billions annual sales from monoclonal antibody against autoimmune and cancer. And then the next wave is a lot of targeted therapy for cancer. Again, it's because the project to cure cancer has elucidated all the signaling pathway that contributed to the cancer. So I would say and then the last contributor is orphan diseases. And there, it's the high pricing that's key, because you're charging people $300,000 per year trying to manage 2,000-3,000 patients worldwide. It's crazy if you think about it. So pricing for cancer drug has gone from $30,000 per year to $100,000 per year lately. And that drives a lot. If you think about the business model of 90% gross margin and the rest are all fixed costs. So pricing is something really to watch for. If there's any problem, it's just that you can see the leverage there. So that's what drives the multiple expansion, and also we do have increased sales in the pipeline. So going forward, what are the exciting area? Cancer immunotherapy is a new area that could be tens of billions in sales per year. The technology there is also monoclonal antibody. The breakthrough is that cancer actually put a brake on the immune system, and we know how to lift that brake. And there are 2 ways to do it right now, but we suspect there will be multiple molecules proven to be important. So you can think about multiple combinations for different tumor or within same tumor, different individuals has different driver. And so it's kind of individualized medicine, but the assay is not well developed yet, so we don't know yet. So that's one big area. And then there's a lot of interesting stuff in liver diseases. And then in terms of technology, monoclonal antibody is still a mainstay. Traditional chemical, when we understand a molecular target, is still a major tool. And then there's these newer technology like antisense, RNA interference, basically to knock some protein down in the body. And then there's also gene therapy, which is hotly debated right now, whether the era of gene therapy has arrived or not. And then you look at people's model, you're like, okay, so gene therapy, if it comes into the model, we predict we cure these people. But meanwhile, the drugs that's modeled to manage these people are still projected to grow. So that's actually not possible. We're getting into an era of not managing symptom, but trying to cure the disease. So that's very different from traditional pharma model. It's like if a disease has 5 symptoms, we just manage it from 5 different aspects, and it's all additive, never competitive. Biotech at the end will be competitive, but I don't think we worry about this for 5 years. So valuation-wise, like, do you really only worry about 5 years, or you should worry about 15 years? That's why everything is so volatile, because it depends on what you think. That 12 minutes yet?
I think you're doing a good job of speaking at our level. Assuming that we are quite layman, I think we're still following, or at least I think I am still following this. So that's great. Well done. Is there more you want to cover, or shall I ask you a question?
Yeah, ask me a question.
Oh, very good. Okay, so what you were just saying was that there's cannibalization, correct? Or
Eventually.
there's likely to be cannibalization. Yeah. So we have a marketplace today where there are valuations being applied to drugs that are treatment drugs that may be overvalued because there may be a cure, right?
At the end of the day,
right.
Yes.
So a lot of this stuff strikes us as binary, right? It's either all up or up down, or all down. Is that an advantage for someone who's running a strategy like yours, that binary element, do you think?
Yeah, so I embrace the binary element very much because that's where the value creation and the destroyment is, right? And some of these cannibalization issue, I probably think too much about it. I don't think other people give a about it. So I choose to play in a very tricky way, right? So I don't ride with the market. I always try to be market neutral so I can take all these things out.
Right. So how should people like us play this marketplace if we aren't as detailed as...
One thing I want to point out, like, incremental thinking in biotech is bad. You have to think big and you have to think outside the box. I would see people want to short a stock because it doubled. I'm like, why are you shorting it just because it's double? Oh, because no stock can double all the time. Well, some stock can. Depends on the potential and what the previous perception is.
Right.
So that's like, I see people shorting index of biotech. There's one biotech index that's market cap weighted. So as this company double, the weighting in the index double again. And if that stock is going to double again, you're in trouble by shorting that kind of stock. So biotech, actually, you either die or you thrive. So you don't want to short a market cap weighted index. And then other things I would say is all the devils are in the details. Biotech company all tell the most amazing stories. If you hear, you're like, oh my God, this is gonna work. But what's really important is what they didn't tell you. And if you don't know the field, you don't know how to ask a question to get out of them what they didn't tell you. So I would say I've seen a lot of brilliant people who do amazing stuff elsewhere, and they get really confident and they march into biotech, and they get buried by some names because they didn't know what's not told. Mm-hmm. So I saw a company lately, and then after they left, I Googled, I was like, what the? This is like a vitamin, high-dose vitamin. So then the broker called me like, oh, are you going to participate in this deal? I said, no. And he said, well, we put together a really impressive list of investors. I was like, yeah, do they know it's a vitamin whatever? They're like, no, never heard of that. So they did very thorough due diligence. So they don't tell you. They tell you this code number or this amazing name. But you have to really understand what are they talking about. Chemically, what this is. Molecularly, what are they trying to target. And what side effect could pop up. They never tell you that kind of stuff.
Okay. So it's pretty clear we need a guide. I get that. But I also heard you say that, and I think we chatted briefly last night. I've got a little bit of an inside scoop here. We talked last night, and I think you told me that monoclonal antibodies, I said it, represented what you felt was maybe the peak of biotech because it was low-hanging fruit, et cetera.
Yeah, that's the most amazing wave ever because cancer and autoimmune are two huge areas where pricing is like through the roof. And then that was the first wave of target that we had no reagent to touch until monoclonal antibody come along. Mm-hmm. And the monoclonal antibody binding to the antigen, that's our natural design. It's high affinity, high specificity. And a lot of drugs' problem is there's an off-target side effect, and a monoclonal antibody very rare side off-target.
So the impression I took from that was that the best has already happened, and maybe it's going to be harder going forward. So should we shift it to Amir and see whether or not he thinks there's a future in what we're doing in biotech? Does that make sense? Don't worry.
Sure, I'd be happy to start here. I will say, first of all, Biwa, that I'm extremely delighted that your dad actually knew what you were doing when you left college, because I can tell you my parents, I'm still trying to explain to them what venture capital is. And until we started a healthcare company, I think they didn't really know, my mom didn't really care what I did, but then I started a hair care company and she was very excited about what I do for a living. So I think, we were talking outside, and I was going to be quite positive actually with my comments until I found out that friends of mine that are, kind of journalists on the side are actually talking up the industry, and that usually means in January if someone's very excited, what's going to happen the rest of the year. I will say the following, which is regarding and I don't know if people can hear me or not, but regarding are we in a bubble or not? I mean, that's obviously the question on everybody's mind. Is this fundamental or is this a moment in time? The way I tend to look at these things is you look at how people react to discontinuous events, so a news event. 4 years ago, 5 years ago, when somebody announced something bad, the percent change in their stock price was dramatically larger than when they announced something equally good in biotech. And I think that now, when you look at these companies that are making these announcements, the good news is disproportionately rewarded relative to the bad news, and so therefore there is definitely enthusiasm, positive energy built into the people's reactions right now. And actually, interestingly, the prices go up because the prices are very highly valued on the public side. Because people anticipate good news, and then the good news comes out and it goes even higher. And so there is definitely this double counting that's happening, which I think Biwa is correct to point out. So that's kind of the negative side of what we see, is that there is just a little bit of a rose-colored glasses everyone's wearing right now. But let me give you 3 reasons why I think an occupational hazard of venture capital is you become an optimist, right? So I think 3 reasons why we actually have continued to invest in healthcare for the last 20 years and will continue to do so, especially biotech. I'll give 2 reasons. One is, 2 of them are kind of ground up, one regarding financing and one as to how these companies are built and productivity gains within the industry. But maybe I'll start first with kind of a treetops. If you look at the U.S. healthcare system broadly, it's about $3 trillion of spend. It turns out, despite the fact that we think Americans consume a lot of medicine, by and large, we actually consume about the same amount of procedures in medicine as Europeans do. So if you count the number of MRIs, you count the number of times we go to a doctor, actually Germans and Americans are almost matched. The difference is we spend twice as much money for every single one of those procedures. And this can't go on. We're going to go bankrupt. And it's not a secret. And so costs are going to come down. There's just no question that costs as a whole system have to go down. So when you look at that $3 trillion, as much as we like to blame pharmaceutical companies, they're only 11% of that spend, more or less, growing at like 2% or so a year. Insurance company profits are tiny if you actually really add it all up. So in the end, about 80+% of that spend is actually human labor. It's the largest economy that actually spends almost all of its time still spending money on human labor. And that's your doctors, your nurses, all the people in the back, processing the claims. It's just actually shocking how much overhead there is in healthcare. And so if you think about that $3 trillion being used more effectively, the only 2 technologies that can really help you get there, maybe there's 3 actually. One are drugs, because drugs actually keep you out of the healthcare system. They either get you out of the hospital faster or they prevent you from having a disease that gets you in the hospital. The other is healthcare IT, which again is this idea of trying to make the doctor's office and the hospital a better enterprise, a more efficient enterprise. And then the last is diagnosis. If I can catch you before you're sick and I can help you avoid going into the hospital, I can save a lot of money. And so we have been very interested in all 3 of those areas, because over the next 20, 30 years, $3 trillion is going to shift, and hopefully the healthcare industry will be like almost all other industries, where the majority of the spend is not in just kind of back office paperwork. So the drugs play a critical role in that. If you look at it's a little known secret, no one seems to notice it, but in the last about 7-10 years, the number of cancer deaths in the United States have been steadily dropping. You never hear about it in the press. No one ever talks about it. But cancer deaths in the United States, broadly writ, both men and women, age-adjusted, peaked around the turn of the century. And in this century, they pretty much dropped steadily, which means that the amount of money we're going to spend, and that's because of drugs. It's because of early diagnosis in medicine. It's not that the surgeons are better today than they were before, or that your hospital stays better. So what's happening is that the amount of time you spend in the hospital with 3 months to live, where a tremendous amount of expense is spent on you, is being shifted to these medicines that, are very, very expensive, but they get you out of the hospital, they get you back at work, you're allowed to be productive with your family, pay taxes, et cetera. And so the productivity gains from drug investment are very, very large, and I think over the long haul, this industry is going to be transformed by the medicines we create, and you see it over and over again. And it's not just drugs, by the way. if you look at, open heart surgery, which was very common, you'd be in the hospital for a week. Now they come in and they do a stent, and you're out within, by the afternoon, pretty much. And again, just the less cost in the system that's created by that is much better. So I'm very bullish on the top side of that. There'll be some winners and losers in the near term, but as hospitals are being forced to take on risk, in the past they were paid for fee for service. But one of the things that accountable care and many other trends in the industry are doing is they're causing physicians to get paid $100,000 for their breast cancer, regardless of how many procedures are done. The doctors are now incented to be more efficient because they lose if they're not efficient. And so if there's a cancer therapy that works the best on that patient, they're going to give it to that patient because they want to save the money for themselves. And so I think there's a lot of trends that are going to drive towards medicine, actually, drugs, in my opinion, and more of the spend will shift there. So I'm actually really bullish on the market growing pretty dramatically. And then if you look at the bottoms-up approach, if a good example is actually if you compare HIV to SARS. So, and I think the point of my comment is that a lot of technology is coming to revolutionize this industry. So HIV, took about a decade to really understand what it was, to even really realize it was a virus, understand how to attack it. It took about another decade to come up with drugs that really managed the disease well. If you then contrast that to SARS, which admittedly is a very different kind of disease, it emerged from China there was a case or two in Canada that came from Hong Kong, and then it kind of broke out in Canada. It emerged around early March of 2003. By the end of April, they had sequenced that virus. They knew exactly what its structure was, and they were starting to attack it, be able to diagnose it, know where it's spreading, and attack it. That was because of genome sequencing. And it was the fact that, and since then, the cost of genome sequencing has been dropping, at an incredible rate. So there's a lot of bodies of evidence now around the world where people collected patient samples. They know the genetics background of a lot of people. They know what kind of cancers they have, what genetics those cancers have. They're keeping tissue samples. We've invested in a lot of these companies as well. And so when I fast forward to a company we just started that came out of stealth mode, when we started the company, we've been working on it for about 9 months. We announced it a month ago. At the time that the biology came out of Harvard, great biology, great science papers, great stuff in animals, et cetera, we already knew there were publications and people we had contacted that had patients that had genetic knockouts that had mutations in the genes that the animal studies directed you to, and you knew what those patients suffered from. You could actually make a direct link. Before we ever started the company, we were making a direct link between what we were studying and what we were basing the company around innovation-wise with human disease. We know what patients to select. We know exactly where to go in our clinical trials. We also know how to get those antibodies that Biwa spoke about from India, China, a variety of service providers, and small molecules that we plan to make from India and China, whereas 10, 20 years ago, you had to actually build your own antibody division within your biotech. Only the big pharmas had those capabilities. So the productivity, the ability to go from a standing start to a clinical trial where you know the patients and you have a reasonably high chance of success or failure, but at least quickly, is incredible. It's unlike anything I've seen actually from when I started. It's really amazing. And we won't see the fruits of that because it takes 4, 5, 10 years for that evidence to pop up. But that is what you're starting to see, I think, in the newest crop of biotechs that have gone public, the speed with which they're generating really interesting data. It reminds me a little bit of when Excel and all these tools came out in the office. Everybody was spending money on computers, Y2K, et cetera, but the businesses weren't getting that much more efficient. It took a certain amount of time for people to reorganize their business processes so that they could take advantage of the fact that you can work from home, et cetera. I think the same is happening in biotech in a very different way. I think the technology is really revamping the industry. And then lastly, what I would say is our business model is to back great people. And as Peter pointed out, the amount of money in the system has shrunk by at least a factor of 2, if not more. When I started in the industry, there were 30, 40 firms that invested in early stage biotech in Boston. There's 4 left, and we're happy and lucky to be one of them. And there's 4 of us being really active out there. So the entrepreneurs we're finding, the deals we're finding are just at such a high quality level. And the same is true for the companies that are going public and the companies that BWA gets to review and invest in or short in the public markets. The amount of money in the system has shrunk. So Darwin's an optimist, and so the people that are surviving are more entrepreneurial, they're more capital efficient, and I think you're just building better businesses. So I think the lack of money and the healthcare trends are driving us towards a place where this technology innovation is really dramatic, and I think we're seeing the benefits of it. It'll still be up and down. Don't get me wrong. I think people are overly optimistic right now. But over a 5-10 year horizon, I think it'll continue to be more good announcements over time.
So just a quick follow-up on that. If it's getting so skinny from a funding perspective, and these businesses continue to be as capital intensive as they used to be, how the heck are you going to get them to the point where they're going to have a chance to capture BWA's attention?
Yeah, actually, it's a good question, and it's really why I'm kind of very enthusiastic. So if you look at our last 5 or 10 companies we've started, whereas, say, in 2005, we would have done we love to do very small investments early on, capital efficient, get the entrepreneurs to really think capital efficiently. But even when we would do that, within 6 months or 12 months, someone would present the company with a $20 to $30 million Series B term sheet, regardless of where the company was in its development. Didn't matter. And the company would say, well, we got to get in the clinic because we just did a Series B, which is a strange way to think. And then you would do a Series C, and there was just a supply train of money that was kind of on these at these milestones that had more to do with investors. Now these companies are going off, and before they even approach us, the entrepreneur is coming back with a term sheet from a pharmaceutical company. They're coming in with angel money from a foundation support. They're coming in with money from Singapore or Russia. So they are being more creative, and they're being more entrepreneurial, and they're finding capital, and we're helping them. I mean, no question about it. Those of us that are left investing are helping them be more creative about how they finance their companies, and it's creating for a better ecosystem. So it's really entrepreneurs, and they're finding money everywhere. It just isn't any longer, on Winter Street or in Sand Hill Road. It's just in different, kind of more creative places.
Yeah. Money's no longer free, as we say.
Yeah. Well.
So speaking of money no longer being free, what do you say, Tim? Tim, as the operator dealing with VCs, dealing with capital requirements, maybe perhaps you can elaborate a bit.
Sure, happy to. And I guess by definition, given that I play in both venture and run companies, I better be optimistic. So I just want to play off some themes at the start, and one of them is the parental theme. So I'm a local person grew up around New Haven, and when you grow up around New Haven, all your parents want you to go to Yale. And I, in fact, got into Yale and didn't go there, which broke my parents' heart. So when I came back on the faculty of the medical school, it sort of made their day. It was like the prodigal son. So when I quickly thereafter left to join the pharmaceutical industry, my parents were appalled, and I still remember my mother's question to me, and her question was, "Will you still be a doctor?" So I guess we've all had those experiences, but certainly despite my mother's reservations, I've never looked back, and have really enjoyed and feel privileged to be able to do what I've done. So I'm going to try to provide some historical perspective, because again, I do believe to a certain extent there are elements in our past that are help us guide our view of the future. And I think in this industry, that really is true, and something we often overlook. And it's actually something that I think is a good thing and not a bad thing, because it gives me confidence about the future. But let me just start. I think we a hard part of these sorts of conferences, we have to talk somewhat in generalities, and that's a bit dangerous, because I think that the devil is always in the details. So I'll just start with that caveat. But in thinking about that and the topic at hand, has biotech arrived? I thought this morning, I said, well, what is biotech? I'm not sure what that is anymore. So I looked at the definition in Webster's, and it was sort of the fundamental definition, really relating to a manufacturing process that we use living organisms to manufacture products. I think that's where this all started. But then, I Googled, well, what are the top 20 biotech companies? And I saw some companies you'd expect there. In my mind, I expected them there. Gilead. But I said, well, Gilead's products aren't made in biological systems. And I saw some real funny companies. I saw like Teva there, and I saw Shire there. And I said, well, what is that? And so I think what's evolved is, for a variety of reasons, people want to be seen not as pharmaceutical companies, but as biotech companies. And so therein is just one of the dangers, I'll say. And then some hedge it, and they call themselves biopharmaceutical companies. So again, that's just a warning that, all biotech is not the same, and I think you really have to get granular with your investments and really try to have a good understanding of what you're looking at. I think, the power of what healthcare technology can do is best served in some of the examples Amir mentioned, and I think even back a little bit further, and that's, life expectancy, right? For the first 8,000 generations of humanity, life expectancy was 30 to 40 years. So that goes back to BC up to the 1900s. Life expectancy worldwide, 30 to 40 years. 2000, life expectancy has nearly doubled in westernized countries that have benefited from technology. And to me, that's incredible. And when you look at the causes of that increase and where mortality has been decreased, it parallels what the pharmaceutical and biotech industry have taken on. So those causes were infectious disease, and while a whole host of things contribute to these benefits, certainly vaccines, antibiotics, and antiviral drugs have been fundamental. The second then, and now the leading cause of mortality, is cardiovascular disease. But again, that, like cancer mortality, has decreased over the last decade, in part, again, to great drugs to treat risk factors of cardiovascular disease and mortality, hypertension drugs and lipid drugs. And now, the industry has shifted in taking on oncology. And again, I'm speaking in broad terms, but as Amir talked out, 20 years later, cancer mortality is decreasing. And to me, this is my message, is these are powerful tools and they really have a strong societal impact. Now, I know a 100-year investment cycle is probably not in anyone's interest, but again, to me, that's the data that best suggests the power of these technologies and what benefit they can provide to humanity and what value they can create. Now, I don't expect that to continue, but I think what we will be taking on are things that provide better quality of life. So, I don't think we'll keep doubling life expectancy, but we will increase productivity within that longevity and create better quality of life, with drugs. So I'm also going to touch on, where my career has been, because, again, I think there are learnings there in terms of the transitions this whole industry has gone through and what that portends for the future. So I'm particularly going to comment on my time at Bayer. So at Bayer, I was basically their chief medical officer. You're responsible strategically and operationally for everything we did from phase 1 through registrations, through the safety of the products in the marketplace worldwide. And when I joined Bayer, Bayer looked like a classical big pharma company. So it was number 9 at that point or something like that. And the areas we worked in were very similar to what I just walked you through. Infectious disease, where Bayer was a large player. Cardiovascular disease, where Bayer was an innovator, a large player. And those two areas really drove the revenues of the company. And then the other areas we were trying to really work into were what I call the real other productive areas for companies at that time. Metabolic diseases, diabetes in particular, and respiratory diseases, COPD and asthma. And that was the bread and butter of the company, and the company was built to support those types of products. So like all pharma companies then, those were largely general practitioner products. That's where we made our money. We had huge sales forces to call on general practitioners, in the U.S. and in every country around the world. So, sales forces, tens of thousands up to hundreds of thousands, in certain big pharma companies. But even at that time, even in a chemical company like Bayer, back in the early 1990s, Bayer was playing in biotech. So again, one of the first biotech products I got involved in was one of the first monoclonal antibodies directed against TNF. Our problem is we picked the wrong spot. So again, for those of you probably don't, many of you don't have this background, but TNF antibodies are one of the mainstays. They sell billions of dollars. Probably tens of billions of dollars, today. We had the first one. We developed it in a different place that we developed for sepsis, and we spent about $250 million and failed. And then we didn't have the courage to follow the science to where these antibodies then became productive. But even back then, Bayer was playing in these spaces, and Bayer also was a rare disease company. Who would have ever thought that? But we had biological products, replacement products for alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency, prolastin, and for hemophilia. Initially, a protein replacement product from pooled plasma, and then a recombinant product. And today, I think of what type of business you could create just with those sorts of products. But in that business model back then, they were almost invisible because they didn't fit the general practitioner sales model, and you didn't need tens of thousands of sales reps to promote those patients. So they didn't fit strategically, but in fact, they were there. The last part of my time at Bayer, I led Bayer into oncology, and again, I just laugh to think about it. Our thinking then was unmet need, which is still true, lack of competition, it now is the most competitive area in the development space, and cost-effective development. And by that I mean, just to give you an example, when we developed drugs back then in cancer, it cost us $10,000 per patient. Today the costs are in excess of $100,000 per patient. But that was Bayer's move into oncology, and I got to reside over the first clinical responses of a new cancer drug, which became the first drug ever approved for the treatment of liver cancer, and that's a very compelling thing to be involved in, and again, provided great value to Bayer and great value to patients. So in that period of time, Bayer, in essence, was transitioning its business model much in the way the whole industry has transitioned from a business model built around GP products, general practice products, mass marketing of products as broadly and as far as you could, for common daily use, to really a much more specialized focus around specialized sales forces and specialized products in hematology, oncology, being two particular areas, and they've done incredibly well. The whole industry, the big guys have all moved in that direction, in part driven by the biotech companies who have grown up beneath them. So just to keep following on this, my next stop was at a biotech company, a public traded biotech company called Curogen, based in New Haven, that had come out of Yale. Was there as the head of research and development. And again, my thesis then, having been with the big guys, is the big guys have their strengths, they have their weaknesses, and one weakness is speed, and two is R&D. So I was a firm believer that it was hard to do great R&D in a big organization. There are just some barriers to doing it. So I think the thesis is correct. The timing was bad. I described that decade. So this was, I went there in 2002. I described that as a bad decade in general if you were in this industry. So again, our model was built around antibodies and proteins and oncology and immunology, but it was a period of time where we just had to keep ratcheting down because capital became more scarce, and we became a binary company with a single product. Now that product, was hard to get interested in back then. It was something called an antibody-drug conjugate, and we were the first company to take this next generation of these things called antibody-drug conjugates to market. We'd go to pharma and they had no interest in these. This is not pure. It's it's a hedge. Blah 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 blah. With Curogen, in the duress of 2008, 2009, we ended up merging with another similar company called Celldex Therapeutics, another publicly traded company. And that was a critical mass story, and our idea was to build up critical mass, not to be a binary event, and to build an immunotherapy company based in oncology. This is only 2009. I can tell you that was not a popular concept back then, and we just heard this is one of the mainstays of the future. So, one of my learnings in this industry is you have to have belief in what you're doing, and you have to persevere, because the winds do change and the environment changes, but you really have to believe in the fundamentals of what you're doing and seeing it through. And I think you either have to be a long investor or a very creative hedge fund manager who can really read these ups and downs to be successful here. So I'm now, a venture partner, but mostly what I do is get involved in starting up companies. Again, I'm just going to mention a couple of these because it gives a bit of a view of where I think things are going. So the one I think that was mentioned in the introduction was a technology from a professor at Yale, Craig Cruz, a very well-known, successful scientific entrepreneur already. And the idea here is really a disruptive one, and that is to create drugs, small molecules, that can degrade a pathogenic protein you want to just get rid of. So this technology hijacks, the cell has normally in it machinery that regulates proteins, and particularly has machinery that gets rid of old proteins or proteins that are no longer functioning. It's a quality control mechanism. So basically this technology allows us to hijack that normal mechanism, but do it with specificity to get rid of something that is causing problems within the cell. So examples being a cancer protein that's driving cancer that you want to take out of the cell. There are a whole host of examples, very broadly speaking. So again, what that we try to feed into there is, again, the same model that pharma and even the big biotechs need innovation, and more than ever, they're looking for novel. And my belief is in these small private companies, what we're looking to do is really feed those guys. So I'm not necessarily playing to the public markets as much as I'm playing to the upper part of my food chain in terms of the large pharma and the large biotech companies. Just other companies I've been involved with starting up is a next generation antibody. So again, I think this is important. I don't think antibodies are done. I think they're just beginning. And I think if you think back to the pharmaceutical industry, what they were expert at was life cycle management. So Bayer got 25 years of exclusivity around various versions of their calcium channel blocker and various versions of ciprofloxacin. With antibodies, again, there's great opportunity to keep improving them. And the best example, I would say, is Herceptin, which was a multi-billion-dollar product in and of its own right, and it's going to be usurped by Genentech's own product, a Herceptin antibody drug conjugate. And unlike small molecules, generics in the antibody space and antibody drug conjugate space are going to be very difficult. And when they arrive, it's not going to be price erosion from 100 down to 15%. It's going to be price erosion of 100 to 70%. And I think that's a big change in the marketplace. So, in closing, I take us through this because, again, I think, where we are now builds off of a long period of time, and that gives me confidence that there really are, there's a real strong foundation under it. This isn't, while 2013 was 2013 from an investor perspective, in terms of the fundamentals of what you're investing in, this is built up over a long period of time and has a very solid foundation. I think the big pharma guys have realigned their business models. They've survived the patent cliff, and they're going out and they're looking to buy innovation. I think we have a whole new tier of biotech companies, Celgene, Gilead, Amgen, Biogen. These are no longer biotechs like we used to think of them. These are as big as those other guys we talk about. They're as big as Bayer, they're as big as Pfizer, and they have as much cash. And these guys are also looking to buy innovation, and I think that's very healthy. I think the regulatory environment, at worst case, is stable. It's as stable as it's been in my 20-year career. And in the optimist case, it's actually very supportive. So again, rightly or wrongly, in the areas of rare diseases, autoimmune diseases, and cancer, you can get drugs approved in a very attractive fashion and a fairly cost-effective fashion. So I think the gorilla in the room is pricing. And I think that will be an issue. Again, I don't think it's going to be a draconian issue, certainly over the next 5 to 10 years. So I think it'll be a pressure point, but I still think, these products and these novel products will command pricing. And final comment, just to follow up, I don't think there will be this cannibalization because I really don't think we'll cure diseases in a way that people no longer need drugs. We'll cure diseases in a way people need to stay on drugs. And we've seen this already. Again, when you look at HIV, right, part of the value from those franchises are people on those drugs for life. When you look at chronic myelogenous leukemia and Gleevec, everyone thought that was going to be a small drug because everyone envisioned it as being a relatively acute course of therapy. That drug, in essence, has provided people ability to live long, but they stay on the drug. So again, I think what you're going to be seeing, again, is people, we're going to be, maybe we are curing people, we're going to be curing them on drugs and expanding their lifespans that way, which again is very productive from a business model perspective.
Great, helpful. I guess, again, one follow-up before we move on. Sometimes I wonder whether founders and even venture capitalists are more enamored with the science than they are with the business model. And you've been at this for 20 years or so. Has that changed at all? And what are the principal objectives for Arvinas at this point?
Yeah, well, principal objectives to make money. Now
we love to hear that.
Right now, again, as I always say, okay. So with that as a starting point, I'd rather make money making drugs than manufacturing blue jeans or creating an app. I think it's a great thing to do. But Yeah, I think, the beauty of the private, I've been in large places, a small cap public company and private places. The stuff that goes on in private places, guys in large cap companies would faint, in terms of the shoestring you run on. They would tell you it's impossible to do. A company tells me, or I look at my own cash runway and I say, well, I have 6 months of cash. I look at that and say, that's great. We got a good runway. My former colleagues would faint. So, I think there's a huge, virtue to small companies and the motivation, right? The entrepreneurs and the investors are all motivated to be capital efficient. And I think there's as strong an alignment in those types of companies as you can possibly have, and I think it's very healthy.
Okay, great. Shall we open it up? Other questions? Yes, sir.
A little bit of a shift. Telehealth. As baby boomers are maturing and aging, either themselves or their parents, for a lot of reasons, economic, just social, etc., there's this massive trend to keep people, what we've all talked about, at home, especially as they age. With medicines and keeping people at home, will the government get involved to help enforce that? Keep people out of the hospital, out of nursing homes, at home, and still maintain some kind of a medical or medicine regimen so that they're not packing out of hospitals?
My opinion is that, government, when government tries to regulate things, it should try to do that after the markets have already somewhat spoken. I think is usually when it works best, because it's hard to predict what works best. And I think the markets are actually driving this. If you look at Massachusetts, where we switched to not so much a regulation around staying home or anything like that, but around a single payer. Everybody has to be insured, not a single payer, but everybody has to be insured. Kind of the precursor to Obamacare. Really what happened was all the insurance companies, which, by the way, many of them aren't taking risk anymore, so 85% of the revenues of Aetna and Humana are actually literally like paychecks. They essentially are claims processors. They actually don't take the risk of all of us. Our employers are basically paying for all of us on the commercial side, and the government pays on the Medicare side. When everybody went into kind of one big bucket, one of the consequences of that was that the providers started to buy risk from the insurers. So Partners, Newton Wellesley, all these hospitals in Massachusetts are essentially taking on the risk of 10,000 patients, 5,000 patients, 1,000 patients. And they're signing contracts with Aetna, Blue Cross, Blue Shield, et cetera, where they are agreeing to take care of the patients for a fixed amount, and they get to keep the profits, and they also absorb the losses. There's some caps and reinsurance that goes into it. And as a consequence, now the doctor is incented to make you cheap. When I was paying them by procedure, if you just look at the radiologist as an example, radiology department were the goose that laid the golden egg in a hospital, because they were paid by procedure. So every time you went in there, if the MRI is not nice enough, let's go get another one, because it kept getting billed back to the insurance companies. Now the CFO of the hospital gets $100,000 for that knee replacement. He's not going to let the radiologist take 3 or 4, MRIs unless it's absolutely necessary. He's now going to tell the radiologist, stay out of there if you can, because I got to save money on this thing and make money. And where is the money? Can he save the money? It's to get you home as fast as possible and get you on a course in medicine that absolutely saves you, money and gives you a better, healthy life. At the end, this is where I actually think everything lines up nicely. Healthy people are cheaper than unhealthy people, and there is a true alignment in that. And I think that it's very easy to do our business in some sense if you think about making people healthier faster, because you can make money on that. I should get paid some of that productivity gain. So I think it's coming really, really fast in Massachusetts, but it's not coming because the government is directly saying you have to do at-home stuff. I think these risk-bearing contracts that these providers have taken on, they have no choice. Many of them don't know how to do it, so don't get me wrong. I don't think they figured out how to do it, but they want to do it so badly, in Massachusetts at least, that we're kind of intrigued by that.
I know on the West Coast, Oregon, Washington, even California, for organizations that will take the risk are signing up for programs that the government or state and local agencies will pay for the pilot program,
Yep.
where they get people home, and there's a phone call if they don't take their medicine, or they can take their blood pressure automatically, again, just to keep them out of the hospital. And the government are trying to, these local programs are trying to test this to see if it makes sense.
Yeah.
And again, the cost savings could be dramatic if it gets traction.
Yeah, I think there was a period of time where the government was paying for kind of new insurance companies, Pioneer, ACOs, et cetera. There was a whole bunch of them. I think that money's dried up a little bit with all this focus on accountable care, and some of the debacle there. But I think that was the best thing we could be doing is just not predicting what's going to happen, but giving entrepreneurs on the healthcare delivery side a little bit of money. I mean, we started a business where with 5 phone calls, we helped people quit smoking. So 41% of the people that enrolled in the program got 5 phone calls before they decided to quit. 12 months later, they were free of cigarettes, 41% of them. It's a shocking number compared to anything else. And actually, by the time we sold the business, that number had risen to 45%. That was because of actually the tobacco money. The reason that company was started was because it was a nonprofit-based effort in Washington State because of the tobacco settlement money, and we spun it out of a healthcare group to turn it into a for-profit business. That saved so many lives. And if we just had a fund of money that could, in a nonprofit, kind of from a government standpoint, help these innovators, it doesn't have to all be drugs. It can be other ways to kind of keep people healthy and happy. So,
Other questions? Right.
I guess the question is, which are the big biotech companies or big pharma companies that have been most successful at buying in innovation, most successful in terms of profit?
I see Celgene, Biogen, and Gilead doing the best deals. Amgen has been really lacking in that department, and they've done bad deals. So Biogen focus on neurology, and Gilead focus on infectious disease, but they also have done cancer deals. And then Celgene is mostly cancer and some like hematology, some autoimmune stuff. But so in a way, these 3 are good because they survey the whole landscape, and also people approach them all the time. And they have a nice focus, but they're pretty open-minded about new technology, so they're being able to reap the benefit, and I think they are positioned for the next 5-10 years to get a lot of the value of the pipeline. So depending on when the deals are done, biotech in the past, like 20 years ago, only get like 5% of royalty. But now they can get, if they have some proof of concept, they can get 15% royalty and a lot of milestone payment. But you think about it, a good drug has probably operating margin of 60% or higher. So majority of profit went to the big company that did the deal. So that's one way to play the biotech wave is these companies that you don't have to, it's kind of a basket, and also they screen it for you. So that's a great question.
Maybe just on specific numbers, Gilead paid $11 billion for Pharmacet, which had a hepatitis drug. Everybody, me included, said, oh, what a bunch of suckers. Their market cap went up $80 billion, $85 billion since that transaction. $70 billion of that gain was because of that drug being so effective and it just a value the hepatitis C market. Now, again, it may be rosy-colored glasses. They're on a really, there's a lot of expectation for a huge drug launch this year and great performance. But again, when the other acquires, this is to Tim's point, when the other pharma companies are watching that, they have to sit there and wonder whether they're missing the boat. And I think Biwa's right. Those 3 companies have just been, really on a tear.
So much of the gain comes post-acquisition, if you will.
Yeah.
Why are they going down market and taking on the risk of early stage drug development? Is it the competitive element? You've got to get there first?
Yeah, I mean, so again, I think part of it, with the big guys and particularly with the pharmaceutical companies, again, relates to the last decade. And really what they've been looking to do is to shore up their revenues in their phase 3s. And really, I think what they have also done is decided, by and large, they've come to the conclusion that they don't do an R&D great. And, they've all, for their innovation, every large pharma has these externalization initiatives now, and they're real. So these companies are all going out and looking for early stage novel platforms and products to build up the early stage pipeline. At JP Morgan, I probably met with 15 of the top 20, and all of them are that way. And I would also put in that line some of the big biotechs, some of the big biotechs who have gotten to these very large valuations and very large organizations are now in the same place. A lot of those guys, real focus was on their first products to get to market and drive value. Now they're looking back and saying, how are we going to build this? And I think a lot of those folks think that comes from small entrepreneurial companies.
So I want to make a comment about stage of development and de-risking. They're not necessarily one-to-one correlated. So the general market view will be like a phase 3 asset, de-risk it. Phase 1 asset, highly risky. That's where the smart deal comes in, because it's about proof of concept. You have a hypothesis. The most dangerous area of failure is the biology is not what you understood to be. So let's say you say, this is the bad guy on the disease, I'm gonna inhibit that. And it turns out that's way, way downstream of the whole chain for you to interfere. You have to interfere way ahead. And these things you don't know until you get into human. So the biology risk is the unknown. And reagent and all stuff, you can tweak it, right? So there are certain cases, it's like 10 patients, the biology risk is already gone. And other people say, hey, phase 1, single center, forget it. So I never forget Alexion, which is a Yale company. I went to the hematology meeting, and this investigator from UK, he self-initiated the study. It's a complement inhibitor that Alexion was using for cardiovascular and for autoimmune. They all fail. And this guy said, I bet it worked on this very weird disease because I know it's complement driven, and this reagent is great for complement inhibition. So he did like an 11-patient study, and the data is like a black and white. So this disease basically, the red blood cell got lysed by the immune system, by the complement fixation. So there are different ways of looking at it. The urine color changed from black, red to nothing. LDH, which is the indication of cell death, went down. People were dependent on red blood cell transfusion. They become independent. So you look, and these patients are their own control. You can look at their case history and to that point what the change is. So the company has market cap of $600 million at that point, and now it's like whatever, $25 billion on this molecule basically. There's a little bit other molecule later, but majority is hinged on that. Then on the flip side, there'll be like phase 3 trial that's 10,000 people that was based on another phase 3 trial that was 5,000 patients, but the signal is really weak. So getting back to like, what do? You want to invent yourself or you want to go get it? So if you are a biotech company that's really expert at looking at data, you have to do both. You hope for the best for your own innovation, but you survey the landscape. And if you see these inflection points, you jump at it. So pharmacist was an example. Antiviral is a little bit earlier to de-risk. But there's safety issues. But that one actually is the only molecule in that class that didn't have safety problems. So that's, I'm sure that's one area they felt more comfortable with compared with other contenders for the same deal. So that's where all the details matters, because you're looking at small probability. How can you be comfortable that it's not there? So I would say looking at data is highly technical, highly specific, and not formula-based. The most dangerous is formula-based, and that's what in public market the consensus usually is. And the opportunity to make money is almost like a risk arbitrage. You say market perception is this, you think it's that, and then what's the next data point that provide the shift for the other people.
Question, one last question from our fearless leader.
So everyone in the room doesn't necessarily buy companies or securities. Everyone in the room here buys people. So 10 years later, after our last biotech session, Mr. Amir, sir, what's it like to work for Rob Langer?
Sure. No. Well, it's interesting. You know, I've had the pleasure of being mentored by Bob, who I don't know if people here in the room were present when he spoke with my partner Terry some years ago. He's probably the most innovative biomedical engineer in history. Actually, I think he has more patents than anybody alive, but more patents than anybody but Thomas Edison. You know, he's in all national academies. And he's actually just a really, really good person, which is actually hard to find sometimes when people, become really successful. He really cares about people, and I think when we were in the lab, he had this very, very simple kind of thought, which was, almost any. I remember him telling me this story once. When he was a kid and man landed on the moon, he basically realized that as a society we can do anything we want, we set ourselves out to do. It's just a question of whether it's worth the time and it's worth the cost involved. Is it a big enough impact? And so you should just go after big problems. And that's kind of how he ran the lab. He didn't tell us really what to do. He just kind of inspired us to keep going after bigger and bigger problems. And so I think it was actually really interesting training for being a venture capitalist. Because again, and especially a healthcare venture capitalist, because we only want to go solve really big problems. We shouldn't be in the business of creating Me Too drugs and things that there are already solutions to. We should be after curing society's, medical ills and getting rewarded for it, appropriately so that we inspire the next generation of entrepreneurs to do the same. And so it was really good training. He's just a very good human being that really cares a lot about making an impact. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, and I would just wrap by saying there was nothing incremental about today's session. Thank you for making us think much bigger and for educating us as significantly as you did today about how to think about playing in this marketplace. Thank you very much.
So Peter just called me the fearless leader,
not
right?
fearful.
Well, but I am a fearful leader. And What was it, Ingrid? Somebody said only the paranoid survive.
Yeah.
Something like that. Anyways, so I have a couple of wishes. The first wish, after the New Year's, is that the Bruce Museum changes this exhibition. I mean, I don't know about you, but to have Chuck Close in my living room staring at me like that, gosh, let's hope next time we were meeting here, it's something different. And on that note, when we're meeting here, February 28th, Ryan's put together a terrific contrarian theme here called Clouds Over the Emerging Markets, Silver Lining South of the Border. And so we're going to hear some really unique insights from very good people, none of which we've ever heard from or know about, but they're very, very good people. And, and much in the same way I've asked Amir to talk about Rob Langer, Bob Aaron has sat next to me for 12 years. And let me just ask you, Bob, what's it been like sitting there?
It's been really interesting to hear things that look back. And then when you look back to what they were looking back at, you see it's repeating itself all over again. So the more things we've discussed, they come around. They really do. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the panel today, not so much for their presentation, but for the work they do, having been, a personal beneficiary of new technology in the healthcare space. I just think it's terrific, and I've watched doctors change the way they view things. They're getting a little bit more venturesome. They're not falling back onto, well, this is the routine and this is what the book says we're going to do. And the willingness to try things, their ability to focus because of technology, old drugs even, on problems. I think it's just terrific, and I just see really an unlimited upside. Thanks.
Tim, Biwa, Amir, thank you very much. Good job.